two cities on the Persian Gulf, Doha and Abu Dhabi, are the settings for vast new construction projects, including major museums designed by some of the world's most celebrated architects. Leaders in both places see the building sprees as a big part of an effort to steer their societies towards the cosmopolitanism that existed in the Middle East a half-century ago. And they hope to foster a more positive image of the region at a time when anti-Islam prejudice is flaring in the West. I spoke with four of the museum architects: I.M. Pei, Frank Gehry, Norman Foster, and Jean Nouvel. I asked them about their understanding of the social landscape that they found there and how it affected aesthetic choices about the buildings they were designing. In Qatar's capital city, Doha, a man-made island juts from the shore. It is the location for the Museum of Islamic Art, designed by the architect I.M. Pei and completed in 2008. Perhaps best known as the designer of the Louvre Pyramid in Paris, Mr. Pei talked about how the basic geometric forms of the Islamic Museum were in some ways shaped by the desert sun.
The geometric purity of the Islamic art came really from the area where the desert is and the sun, where the details become unimportant almost. And I saw Cubism in a different light after I went to the Far East. The clarity of the sun make them very much aware of the forms and the geometric compositions of building and landscape. And that is part of the Islamic world that I confronted when I designed Doha. I think the commission to do the Louvre came to me as a surprise. I say, please, let me come to France, let me come to Paris and look into it. The history of Louvre goes since 12th century. It's a long, long history of which I'm only vaguely familiar with. So now he says, we'll come in and do the Louvre. It was an incredible challenge. Doha doesn't have much of a history. You're looking for something there that isn't, there wasn't anything there. I think the only thing I learned about Doha is change. Everything is changeable. Any site you choose, it changes with the shifting sand. Yeah. Well, this is what makes it interesting, is that you can shape it. You can shape your site. You can make your own site, which you cannot do when you do something in Rome or something in Egypt. It's there, it's given, but not there. Nothing is given. Everything is changeable. So therefore, this is something for you to mold. But then what you do, you may not be so certain it's going to remain that way.
The United Arab Emirates capital, Abu Dhabi, lies just south of Saadiyat Island, where the architect Frank Gehry is building a colossal branch of the Guggenheim Museum. Thomas Krenz, former director of the Solomon R. Guggenheim Foundation, pitched the project to Mr. Gehry, who talked to me about how he felt his way toward the design.
The project Tom asked me to do was a Guggenheim Museum similar to the one we did in Bilbao, but with a different mission. It allows there to be a very beautiful narrative which shows work from Lebanon, Syria, Israel, Emirati, etc., etc., in the context of world art. The lowest floor is a changing exhibition, and then the upper floors, as you get higher, get more into more historic work. Those floors are also joined horizontally, so that any show in any time period shows what's going on around the world on one floor, interconnected. The fact that I had no context to play with, and the realization that this was a very private culture. They weren't going to invite me home for dinner necessarily, and so it was going to be hard to figure them out. You could only figure them out from their what they've done. So their footsteps in the sand, so to speak, are available, and you have to build on that. I went to a site that wasn't even there. It was in the water, and I was told, there's your site, and we're going to build an island. I mean, they had to build out to protect the beaches, so that was the functional reason for jutting out into the water. And it created a place to build this museum. My first moves were to try and create outdoor spaces around the building that could be cooler than the desert. And I came up with these trellises, and I started to make these teepee shapes. When the Emirati representatives and the Sheikh Sultan saw those models in my office, they responded so favorably that I realized I'd connected in some way. When I went back last year to see Süleymaniye Mosque in Istanbul, I realized Süleymaniye is organized symmetrically on the XY axis, but on the bias, it's got this messiness that the domes and things collide, and the blocky shapes. And I realized that my building was doing that. And I feel like I'm kind of a blind man, feeling my way into this culture. But miraculously, I mean, maybe they're communicating with me, and I'm communicating with them. And I'm not a great believer in mental telepathy, but something great has been happening between us, and it's resulting in something that they like and I'm proud of.
On Saadiyat Island near Abu Dhabi, Jean Nouvel designed a branch of the Louvre that draws on romantic images of the Middle East, the domes of Islamic mosques, light filtering through tree canopies in an oasis, and Venice's canals.
Ce qui était important à Abu Dhabi, c'est effectivement de trouver un sens par rapport à ces grands musées vis-à-vis d'un espace public qui dépassait l'espace du musée. J'ai décidé donc de faire le musée avec une idée qui m'est chère depuis longtemps, c'est que le musée doit être un fragment de ville et pas un bâtiment. Donc pour moi, c'est plutôt un quartier. C'est plutôt un lieu où on peut venir, rester. Et donc, j'ai mis tout ça dans une sorte de microclimat, protégé par une grande ombrelle. Et finalement, j'ai joué sur la géométrie de la superposition de ces deux dômes par des perforations, ce qui crée un cinétisme interne et ce qui crée finalement une sorte de pluie de lumière qui arrive sur les espaces qui sont en dessous. Mais pour moi, ça évoque exactement les raies de lumière qui passent à travers les planches des souks ou les tressages des souks qui sont souvent protégés à 90% de la lumière, comme ça.
In Doha, Jean Nouvel's National Museum draws its inspiration from a humble source, the world of the Bedouins from which modern Qatar sprang.
Il y a une dimension monumentale dans les musées à certains moments, puisqu'il y a une dimension symbolique très forte. Et là, j'ai essayé de reproduire de façon distanciée, évidemment, mais des choses qu'on ne voit pas à cette échelle-là, qui sont les phénomènes de cristallisation. J'ai essayé de jouer sur la couleur même du sable, j'ai essayé de jouer sur la constitution géométrique de ces cristaux, comme les roses des sables. Simplement aux intersections des disques ou des plans, on garde quelques vides qui prennent des formes assez aléatoires. Le musée de Doha, c'est un musée national qui doit parler de l'identité du Qatar. Les Qataris étaient des nomades, ils vivaient avec peu de choses. Je trouve extraordinairement beau ces tentes, ce peu de choses qui sont posées au sol, et cette immensité du paysage dans lequel ils habitent finalement. Mais donc il va falloir arriver à traduire la beauté de ces origines et de cette nature profonde qui est celle de nomades qui se sont arrêtés au bord de la mer et qui ont trouvé dans ce désert finalement des richesses insoupçonnées, qui les ont amenés vers une forme de modernité un peu dure, je dirais, puisque toute l'expression des plateformes pour le gaz ou pour le pétrole et toutes les richesses industrielles qui ont été trouvées se traduisent par des choses qui sont à l'opposé de leurs origines. Et ça va être montré comment la vie qui s'installe là a une très forte identité aussi, et que cette identification est en train de se construire aujourd'hui.
The United Arab Emirate capital, Abu Dhabi, will have a new cultural district on Saadiyat Island and a new national museum by architect Norman Foster. Mr. Foster talked about how he approached the project by studying the region's historical builders and their response to the harsh desert landscape.
I think the starting point has to be to look far forward. You have to look far back. How did you achieve a sustainable development before you had unlimited free energy to freeze everything in sight? In other words, what did you do to transform a hostile, barren, desert environment into wonderful spaces, outside spaces, inside spaces, that had a quality of life? For us, our beginnings are with the architecture without architects. It's what the intuitive, indigenous builders over many hundreds of years discovered through trial and error. And they created an extraordinary architecture. If you look at those not in picturesque terms, but how they worked scientifically and created very desirable places, both outside and inside, that's a great starting point. So it is having a respect for the past and trying to learn what makes one place different from another, so that when you go there, you really feel there is a there, that it's not some shopping center that could be in, New Jersey or depending on where we are. It's not a literal, no, it's not a pastiche, it's not a historical reconstruction, but it's trying to get into what the underlying principles are. And those are universal, because the one thing that is a constant from that time past and now are the elements. It's working with nature. In terms of the National Museum, the way in which it celebrates the life of a very revered, respected, important person who founded the Emirates, the way in which he greened the desert. So it's a celebration of the garden. So this building works with the elements. And in that sense, it celebrates the culture and the traditions. So it's very much about flight, about falconry. And if I think about those towers and aerodynamics, traditionally, those wind towers are working with nature. They're about air movement. They're about creating cool spaces in a hot place. And they're about using intelligence, and they're about technology. Those wind towers, which may look beautifully decorated and so on, were the cutting edge of technology at that time. And they're important lessons to learn from that now. And those lessons and their symbolism become embodied in the National Museum.